Couples under stress, what's the most frequent piece of advice that you get?
Under stress, women seek emotional connection. They seek emotional safety through that connection. So they tend to want to be engaged, look for reassurance, have the conversations. Men under stress tend to need to withdraw and figure things out, get into battle mode on their own, which can leave the woman feeling like he's abandoning her, she's not important, he doesn't care about his feelings. We can take it all the way to he's emotionally immature or disengaged. Men and women just process their stress very differently. There's ways that he can meet her while still getting into his cave for his own stress reduction. The first point that I hit is the biological differences between how men and women handle stress. Call it what it is.
That makes a lot of sense. I go into the cave. When I'm in that state of mind, I know that I'm going to respond poorly to stimulus. So I withdraw not for my own mental health, but also the mental health of others, just for the mental being of others. But I wanted to ask you to pivot that. We're talking about stress in general, but with what's going on with the market right now, I'm having a lot more conversations with people financially stressed. The last time I had this many conversations about people panicking about money was the housing crisis. So I'm having
Mm.
conversations I haven't had since 2008. Does financial pressure in the entrepreneurial household differ? Do you give different advice for that from your standard, let's say, relationship stress?
What those conversations tend to look like is a lot of times the partner might not have full visibility on what the finances look like. The story that I hear most often from spouses is like sometimes it's like we have so much money we can plan vacations, and then sometimes the sky is falling and we're talking about mortgaging the house. And so the unpredictability of cash flow, especially for a spouse that doesn't know if it's a lean or green season, can really drive that stress. And so I call it lean or green because I want to keep it really uncharged. And also, I really encourage the entrepreneur to set some boundary, like get some standards, like what's the watermark? As long as there's this much in savings, or as long as this much is paid for the kids' school, whatever the couple agrees on becomes non-negotiable. As the coffers get a little bit closer to the predetermined amount, it requires different levels of conversations. Financial stress, I would agree right now, there's a lot of conversation around. And for entrepreneurs who are truly opportunity oriented, a lot of them are gearing up to find the opportunity in what's happening in the greater picture.
That makes a lot of sense. And do you find it hard to get people to set benchmarks and numbers? I'm always preaching, you've got to write things down, you've got to set goals. Do you encounter some resistance with people writing things down and committing to things on paper?
No, and I think that's because I work with entrepreneurs who are a little bit more established in their businesses. They've gone through the highs and lows, and so they have their own experience to rely on. Like, yeah, that didn't work last time when I secretly took out this big loan or borrowed money from friends and family and didn't tell her. I get quickly why that's a no-fly zone. They've gone through the pit of not writing it down or not having that agreement. They have their own personal expertise of understanding why. For anybody who's listening or watching that hasn't personally gone through that, you can take a page from their cautionary tale of how important the financial fidelity is with a spouse. A lot of business owners, particularly male business owners, don't want to bring that financial stress to their wives. And so, to your point, they think they're doing it out of protection. But when your spouse is truly, truly, in my heart of hearts, that the spouse or the marriage is a multiplier. And if your spouse doesn't know what you're up against, this does become a form of financial infidelity. The couple really has to get clear on what their agreement is. Some spouses actually don't want to know. Some spouses are like, I trust him, go do it. And some spouses really have to revisit different seasons of life where they might make a decision to keep it siloed. But as the relationship and the people mature, it's worth revisiting that conversation of, do we need to reintegrate both minds into our financial structure?
That makes a lot of sense because nothing's in a static environment. Everything's in a flux. Even an entrepreneur at the end of their stage, they're looking at exit strategy, selling their business.
Mhm.
There's a whole other group of stresses. We were talking about demographics, and sometimes the groups of people we attract in our businesses might be different from what we had as an ideal client. So if you could give me your ideal client, the client that you feel your business serves the best and can make the highest and best impact.
My ideal client, the ones I really hit the sweet spot with, have been in business they're well established, they're past startup mode, they're seven, eight figure entrepreneurs. they've been promising their spouses or significant other like 3 to 5 years, and they hit all those milestones and they're still investing more time, money, and energy into the business. A spouse is starting to feel like, all right, this is no longer about us. You said you were working this hard. You said you were sacrificing time and energy with family to build the business. The business is now where you've always wanted it to be, and you're still sacrificing time, money, and energy from the family for the business. And so I'm really at that intersection of helping the entrepreneur get more comfortable and confident of how to win at home so that the couple is united and they're growing together. The trap that I feel so many entrepreneurs can fall in is they get really dedicated to growing the business because they know how to win there. They grow the business at the expense of their family. And my role is to help them grow both together.
You would want to envelop yourself in the environment where you're doing well. I have a friend who's a high level executive at an insurance company, immensely powerful person. And they're not feared, but very respected in that industry. They have a nickname for being tough in all the right ways. Their home life is quite different, where it almost switches roles and they're very passive when they're in the house. And I always thought that was odd. I've talked to them about it a lot over the years, but that relationship, they've been together for a very long time. They first got married when this person was a low-level employee. So that
Mhm.
relationship probably needs to be reevaluated because the power dynamic is ancient. And I think maybe that should be updated. Do you ever see people where they get stuck with these antiquated images of their partner?
I call that past casting. It's when you see a behavior or a trait in your partner, and maybe that partner has grown out of it. But our brains have a reticular activating system where we always see evidence to prove our stories right.
Mm.
And so when we create a story based on one particular point in time, whether that behavior lasts for a week or a month or a year or a decade, we create this story about our partner. And so every time we see behavior that validates that story, we validate our, like, yes, that's right. He is still lazy. She is still controlling or insecure, whatever label we want to put on it. And so that's why I encourage the growth together, because it's really important to be able to look for a new, more supportive story about your spouse, looking for ways that isn't necessarily always true. And I would say that in dynamics where the husband has become more passive, even and especially with the best intentions of whatever she wants, whatever you want, what that does is transfers all of the emotional labor, all of the emotional weight to the woman. She has to be more in her masculine in that relationship. And the masculine energy from the male will not compete against a woman, especially his wife. It's more of a withdrawal, like whatever you want, which stacks the story of the wife. He's not engaged. She has to do all the work. She has to make all the decisions. I see this a lot with CEOs who make big, massive decisions every day. When they get home, there's legitimate decision fatigue, which does switch that power dynamic at home. And that's why they're less confident engaging at home, because the woman is in her masculine because she's always having to decide, always having to remind, this is, these are the details. This is where the shoes are.
And in this case, what was strange about it is it's actually a female executive, but it's the same in both situations. But I think you're right. I think it probably is stressing both partners because that marriage has some years on it. I think they have a lot of work ahead of them to balance that. And they've got wonderful kids, so they've got a lot of reasons to stay together.
Yeah.
But it speaks to the point, not in the perfect situation, but let's say if the relationship is absolutely healthy, let's call it a one. And if it's on the verge of divorce, let's say it's five by the time they reach out for help.
Generally, it's a three. One of the first questions I ask is, this a question of if we stay together or how we stay together? And most often, the answer is how we stay together.
Oh,
I have found that the ones that come to if we stay together, on some level, one or both of them has already decided they're going to leave, and this feels like a last ditch effort. In those cases, it's almost impossible to revive when one or both have decided that it's over and they're just going to go through these motions. There's a lot of dishonesty in those sessions. And without the desire to change, because this does require like big, ego dropping, heart searching transformation. And if you don't have that desire to go through, it really is an effort that's done in vain. And so generally the people that I love are 3 or 4s. They're good, or they some of them, like with their 4s, they're good and they want to get better. I generally don't have any 5s because they're already in the rhythm of constant growth. 3s and the 4s are like, we're starting to get a little crunchy. We've got some edges to round out. The sweet spot is really the people who are the 3 or 4. They're good. They're really good in business and they don't want to tolerate a mediocre marriage.
I'm very happy to hear that because I'm a guy, so guys will come to me, and I'm really surprised how late a guy, and I'm not trying to project myself as the perfect ideal partner. I have really strong antennas. And I'll tell you, I'll never be in a relationship where I'm going to come home and the car is packed. But a lot of my male entrepreneur friends will call me and the car is packed. And I'm like, how could you let it get that? How could you not know that was happening under your roof? Sometimes there's a lot of misconceptions before people come to you. And of course, you've got to get in their brain and set the correct expectations. I think that's a big part of entrepreneurship and service delivery. If you could snap your fingers and either put something in their brain or take something out before they come to
Mm.
you, both the entrepreneur and the partner, what's one thing that you could either insert or remove before they come to you that would make working with you so much easier?
The first one that comes to mind is this person's going to fix my partner. She
Oh,
understands.
Lord.
She's been in my journey because I have been the more driven entrepreneur and the more supportive spouse. I understand the dynamics of both roles. When we're doing a discovery call, I can really relate to each person. The expectation is, okay, good, you finally understand, you're going to fix them. I'm like, no, I'm going to fix you. And I'm not going to fix you. I'm going to help you peel back the layers so that you can rise to your best self. When both people are at their highest self, that's where all the magic happens. One of the things I always say is, I'm going to say things to your spouse or your partner that you have been saying for years. They're going to get off a call with me and act like it's the first time they've ever heard it. And to them, it is because they don't care about impressing me. I have no skin in the game. And so they can take feedback from me very differently than they can from you. And each person I work with my couples as individuals. We do couples calls occasionally, but most of the time it's as individuals. I want them both to have equal airtime. I want them both to speak unedited. So I don't want to be in a session with them where they know they have a family event in 2 days and they don't want to stir the pot and drop a big bomb in our sessions together. So I don't always get the full story because there's a little bit of editing that goes on during couples calls. So I want the full unadulterated story. I'm a big fan of controlling the controllables. And I'm always helping the person I'm on the phone with examine, like, where was this coming from? Was this coming from ego? Was this coming from protection? Were you trying to get a dig in? Is this really valid? Is there another way to say it? I want both couples to feel like I'm working to bring them to their best self. I want them to have confidence that when I'm on a call with their partner, it's not a gossip session. Yeah, that was a really bogus move that your partner did to this person, and then triangulating them against each other. So I want them to be confident that when we're doing our calls together, we're only working on the individual that I'm speaking to.
I would have thought it was couples, but you've given a very good justification for this solo sessions. Yeah, it makes it. That's why I was over here nodding. I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think about the shock of the parents if they have a troubled child and they'll say, Timmy was doing drugs. The friends will call me and they'll say the psychiatrist wants my wife and I in there. I'm like, yeah, it's an ecosystem, brother. It's a and I talk a lot on the podcast about my sobriety. A lot of people go through these 12-step programs and they don't talk to a psychiatrist. They don't get a therapist. They don't read positive books. They just say, I've put down my alcohol or drug of choice, and they stop there. And I can tell you a big difference between the people that have the same number of years sobriety that I do, the ones that did the internal work and the ones that
Mm-hmm.
didn't. I'm smiling all the time, even when I just broke my shoulder a couple of weeks ago. I turned the camera on because I only need one hand. People are like, oh, I can't believe you're not stopping. I said, I love this. I have to stay active. I'm like a shark. I've got to
Yeah.
stay swimming. So I had to put down the keyboard because that really pretty much takes two hands. It's a lot more fun when you use two hands on a keyboard. But I've enjoyed getting back on camera and meeting great people like you, Kelly, and having these stimulating conversations. I let the podcast kind of go to the wayside for a while, but spending this time with you reminds me of why it was such a joy and the best part
Yeah.
of it. And I think you're doing great work. Since I'm also an author, tell me about your book, when you decided to do that, and did you do it because the audience is entrepreneurs, so we understand squeeze pages and lead magnets and different things like that. Did you initially write it just to get your book out into the world, or did you write it and say, I know how this works. I need email addresses because on these platforms, we don't own that information. I always encourage people to get
Sure.
email addresses and build an email list.
So it was more of a of an like an authority move. I do a lot of speaking, so it was more of an authority move than anything. Actually have been not great with lead pages. I go through marketing phases where I'll work with different companies. I do have a little bit of a list that has kind of eked its way up. One-on-one is my magic. It was an authority move for speaking and a way to help people that I wouldn't otherwise be able to serve. It was just a way to get the word out at a bigger impact or make an impact at a bigger scale that wasn't going to require my time on my calendar because I do protect that pretty well. This was just more of an impact move than anything.
And that's what Daniel Priestley suggests in the book. A close friend, Marie Santa Rosa from New South Wales, Australia. She's been on the channel. She's been involved in some of the lives. Now she's the trade show queen. If you want to have a booth, if you want to have a presence, she's the one to talk. That's her thing. And she's writing her book about that. And she had told me a while back about Daniel Priestley's book called Key Person of Influence. To establish your expertise is to write a book. And I think that's exactly right. Like me, I just sell my book. Maybe down the road, I want to do it as a lead magnet, but obviously I invested a lot of time and a lot of money. I mean,
Yeah.
a good cover is, I always tell people that's the one thing you don't want to skimp on is the cover because that
Yep.
sells it. I've seen some rough covers with great content inside, but people don't have very much time. So the cover is as important. You specialize in boy moms. Can you talk us through that and what is a boy mom and why somebody that's a boy mom would need some help from you?
The Boy Mom was actually a spinoff because I had been doing so much work with couples, and so much of the work was obviously there's internal family systems, like it comes from our upbringing. And I have two boys. And so the Boy Mom was like a prequel to the couples work that I'm doing. If women understood the role that we had and the impact that we had on boys and the impact that we don't have on boys, I think it would be very different. And obviously the roles and the modern family has those roles have evolved significantly, not always to the best service of anyone, moms, dads, kids, women. And so because I have a lot of attention on the biological differences between men and women, we're more different than we are the same. And when I started looking at those dynamics and how they play at couples, it was impossible to ignore the impact of a woman because I was a single mom for a very long time. And I see now, knowing what I know now, looking back, oh, I really robbed my boys of some of the experiences they needed because I was looking at them through a female brain. And there's this whole part of them that I was just not wired to see when their dad or coaches or anybody felt like they were coming on too strong with them. It felt like mama bear to protect or wanted to deliver nicely in an affirming way. And I didn't realize how important the iron sharpens iron dynamic is, allowing the boys to be forged in that fire. Felt reckless, like you're going to turn them into more quote unquote toxic masculinity. I want to be really clear. I am not saying that masculinity or men are toxic at all. Toxic masculinity is when it's rough and it's abusive, unchecked, and unguarded.
I think we're
So,
talking
in
about power dynamic there. That's why sexual harassment in the workplace is so noxious because there's this power dynamic between the harasser, who's usually some authority figure,
yeah,
and so toxic masculinity. That's just my humble understanding of it is when someone in power is exerting that. But of course, like you said, young boys, I was unaware of this until after I was already in the army. And I was like, oh, that's why there's the Boy Scouts. There's these rituals, these things. When I got my first promotion, they ran me through the gauntlet and I had my rank on it had pins without the backings and everybody bang, bang, bang. It was harmless, but it was this rite of passage. Some of that is necessary for men. Otherwise, these urban young men, they go into gangs because there's the rich they're looking for. And of course, those young men are usually the product of single parent homes. So they're
yep.
looking for those mentors and they'll either find it in the baseball coach or the drug dealer on the corner.
Mhm.
So that's a very powerful segment that you're into. A lot of us get into businesses because it's a problem that we first learn how to solve. The book that I wrote, Scintilla, it was my journey in solving that problem of trying to come up with a business idea from scratch. I was looking for books about how to come up with business ideas and products and I couldn't find any, which that's usually how I solve problems. I'll go get 3 to 5 books on a topic. And when I
Hmm.
realized there wasn't a book, I thought, well, I guess I'll do the research and I'll produce it, if I think I can get a depth enough. But for you, did you start with a therapeutic background? Did you solve a problem in your own home and then say, you know what, I should do this for other people? How did that start for you?
So it started for me actually on day one in the coaching industry. So I actually didn't know that coaching was a thing. This was way back in the early 2000s. I think I had done like 7 habits of highly effective people at a different job. And I was like, that's really cool. And really long story short, by the grace of God, I ended up working for a coaching company called Strategic Coach, which is Dan Sullivan. He's like the godfather of entrepreneurial coaching. So my first job in the coaching industry was in strategic coach. I spent all day, every day in workshop rooms with highly successful entrepreneurs coming in from all over the world. I just got to observe their conversations as a completely unbiased third party, just watching these struggles and challenges and wins and opportunities that they were having. One of the things I noticed right away was that my clients that would count their spouse or their partner, their marriage as their greatest asset, were always hitting new levels of success. Those that would complain of marital strife or single or unhappy in their marriage were always up against a ceiling of complexity. And so I saw from day one the power of a productive, supportive, harmonized marriage. And so in my young, naive, unbiased mind, I thought, what could be better than being the spouse or a partner of an entrepreneur? You just have to be supportive and everything works out. I would come home every day after work to my then husband. Spoiler alert, we've that marriage did not last, but I'd come home every day after that and be like, we could do this business together and we could do this business. We could start this together. And I had been really bitten by the entrepreneurial bug. And first, we had our kids and we kept talking about all of the things that we could do together. And one day he finally looked at me and said, why do you always need more? Like, why can't this just be enough? Ultimately, that connection degraded. In my next relationship, I was with somebody who matched my determination, my ambition, my drive. And in the beginning, it was amazing because we understood each other very deeply. We support each other, we respected each other. But at that level, at some point, somebody has to give. When you have two strong, determined people trying to do life together, at some point, someone has to give. And that person was me. I lost myself. I lost my identity. I had given up a lot of the things that made me invigorated and passionate in the name of supporting him in his business. One day he looked at me and he was like, what happened to you? You used to light up every room. You used to be so ambitious. You're exhausted and angry all the time. And I was like, yep. So I had been on both sides of the equation.
Wow.
That's why I can equally relate to the more driven partner and the more supportive partner. So yeah, because I've gone to the extreme of both of those roles. To answer your question, it was a dynamic that I observed and then personally experienced. When I first started doing this way back in 2012, nobody was talking about the spouse. It was just the conversation that I started having way back then. In 2015, my first book came out, and then 23 is when my second book came out.
And hopefully we can get you back and talk more about that writing process because that's really a secondary obsession of mine, writing and talking about writing and getting inspired to do that. And do you do your own ISBN or do you run it exclusively through KDP? So there's a whole other box that we can unpack hopefully at another time.
Sure.
But to be respectful of your time, there's just 2 threads that I wanted to pull at quickly. You said Dan Sullivan, and I started smiling because I connected with Dan Sullivan on LinkedIn. For some reason, I thought he was Dan Kennedy, the email newsletter guy. One thing I wanted to ask, are you using any classical frameworks such as the Four Agreements, Love Languages, Men Are From Mars? Are you pulling from any of that, or is that any of that in there, or are you
I
recommending
would
people
say
read those books?
all of them. It really depends on the couple's dynamic. There's a therapist that I am always in some kind of learning, one of the top 5 on my Strengths Finder. So I'm always in some kind of coaching program, whether it's about relationships, entrepreneurships, men or women. I just finished a biorelations class, which teaches about the fundamental differences between men and women. I've learned from Terry Real, who teaches about the power dynamics. Mostly our greatest strength is our greatest weakness. The strengths that make us successful in business can be the same strengths that are challenging at home. I use a lot of like assessments and data points of where strengths are working for us in a relationship or where they might be working against us. It can help build intimacy and understanding between partners, knowing where their partner's coming from or why they might be responding or acting a certain way. So I have a pretty broad spectrum of work that I pull into.
And you brought up a great point for people not familiar. You mentioned Strength Finder, which I think is on 2.0 now. Take an assessment. The whole thing is know thyself, to know what your strengths and
Sure.
weaknesses are. And I think that's a great tool. If you had a friend that was going to go to a coach that wasn't you, what tips would you give them to determine if that coach is good for them or not? In other words, what are the marks of a good coach that you've got the right person?
I think a good coach asks better questions than gives answers. I think helping the person to understand their own why, their own values, what their own options are, why they're jumping to certain conclusions. I think a coach that will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And I think a coach that knows and understands you. So there are certain clients where I will be blunt and push back, and I can be a little bit more aggressive with. And there are certain clients where I know I will lose their rapport if I come on too strong or am too blunt with. So I have to be really diligent about understanding them and understanding that they know that I'm coming for their heart, not an ego to push them down or beat them down. I want all of my clients to meet the best version of themselves, a coach who can reflect back. One of my favorite sayings from one of my mentors, Garen, is if you can spot it, you got it. And a coach that has a quality that you like or respect can probably help bring that same quality out in you. I know that there's some belief schools of thought that say you only hire a coach who's been there or done that before. I've helped a lot of my clients scale their businesses and sell for several more multiples than they thought they would get. And I've never done that. But from the outside looking in, an observer, I know patterns, I know thought processes, I know opportunities.
Not every
Um,
NFL coach was a Theismann, and I'm not a sports
totally.
guy at all, but I'll tell you, some of those guys, I can tell you they never ran the 440. I can look at them and I can tell they weren't very athletic. Well, Kelly, how can people find you? Because you're very active on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. So how can people reach out to you?
Yep, I am on LinkedIn at Kelly Clements, or my website is kellyclements.com. Both of those platforms have my contact information, so you can either book a call with me or reach out via email.
And Kelly, thank you so much. You came on with virtually no prep. This is as new for me as maybe it might be for you, but I'm so grateful to have had you on. And I think the insights were fantastic.
I think you did a great job. It was very fun. Thank you.